Let yourself be guided by Cory. Relax and grow. Hello and welcome to this Yoga Nidra meditation with Cory. Today I've put my own spin on the Yoga Nidra. It's going to be a little bit different from what you're used to. But I've done that so that we hopefully reach a whole new level of deep relaxation. This is a meditation that's designed to help you to sleep. So make sure that it's nighttime when you listen. Get comfortable in your bed. Make sure that you've used the restroom so you're not going to get any disturbances in the middle. Everything is good in your room. Your phone is turned off. The lights are turned down. Whatever you need so that you know that you won't be disturbed. And hopefully you can fall into a deep sleep during this process. Maybe you'll stay awake and go into a whole other world of trance. Whatever you desire, take a nice, big, deep breath for me first of all, just to initiate the beginning of something in your body. Let your deep breaths start to send signals to the brain that it's time to relax. Setting an intention with me, repeat internally or out loud if you prefer. My body likes to relax. I enjoy the sensation of relaxation. My body likes to relax. I enjoy the sensation of relaxation. Closing down your eyes if you haven't done so already. Taking your focus and attention inward. Just scan over your body quickly. Notice if anything needs to be adjusted. And when you know that you're fully comfortable, take all of your focus and attention down to your right hand. Focus on your right hand thumb. Your right hand thumb is heavy. First finger is heavy. Second finger is heavy. Third finger is heavy. Fourth finger is heavy. Palm of right hand is heavy. Back of right hand is heavy. right wrist is heavy. Forearm is heavy. Elbow is heavy. Right upper arm is heavy. Right shoulder is heavy. Armpit is heavy. Chest is heavy. Your right waist is heavy. Right hip is heavy. Groin is heavy. Buttock is heavy. Thigh is heavy. Your right knee is heavy. Calf is heavy. Ankle is heavy. Heel is heavy. The sole of your right foot is heavy. Top of the foot is heavy. Right big toe is heavy. Second toe is heavy. Third toe is heavy. Fourth toe is heavy. Fifth toe is heavy. Left hand thumb is heavy. First finger is heavy. Your second left hand finger is heavy. Third finger is heavy. Fourth finger is heavy. The palm of your left hand is heavy. Back of the hand is heavy. Your left wrist is heavy. Your forearm is heavy. Elbow is heavy. Your left upper arm is heavy. Left shoulder is heavy. Left armpit is heavy. Left chest is heavy. Waist is heavy. Hip is heavy. Groin is heavy. Your left buttock is heavy. Thigh is heavy. Knee is heavy. Calf is heavy. Ankle is heavy. heel is heavy. Sole of foot is heavy. Top of left foot is heavy. Your left big toe is heavy. Second toe is heavy. Third toe is heavy. Fourth toe is heavy. Your fifth toe is heavy. The top of your head is heavy. Forehead is heavy. Right temple is heavy. Left temple is heavy. Right ear is heavy. Left ear is heavy. Your right cheek is heavy. Left cheek is heavy. Right eyebrow is heavy. Left eyebrow is heavy. Your right eye is heavy. Left eye is heavy. Right nostril is heavy. Left nostril is heavy. Your whole nose is heavy. Upper lip is heavy. Lower lip is heavy. Chin is heavy. Jaw is heavy. Throat is heavy. Right collarbone is heavy. Left collarbone is heavy. Right chest is heavy. Left chest is heavy. Heart center is heavy. Upper abdomen is heavy. Navel is heavy. Lower abdomen is heavy. Right groin is heavy. Left groin is heavy. The pelvic floor is heavy. Your tailbone is heavy. Sacrum is heavy. Right buttock is heavy. Left buttock is heavy. The entire spine is heavy, all the way from your tailbone to the base of your skull is heavy. Your right shoulder blade is heavy. Left shoulder blade is heavy. The back of your neck is heavy. The back of your head is heavy. Crown of your head is heavy. Your whole right arm is heavy. Your whole left arm is heavy. Both of your arms are heavy. Your whole right leg is heavy. Your whole left leg is heavy. Both of your legs are heavy. Your entire torso is heavy. The face is heavy. The head is heavy. The body is heavy. Your entire body is heavy. Your right hand thumb is getting heavier. First finger is getting heavier. Second finger is getting heavier. Third right finger is getting heavier. Fourth finger is getting heavier. The palm of your right hand is getting heavier. Back of your right hand is getting heavier. Wrist is getting heavier. Forearm is getting heavier. Your right elbow is getting heavier. Upper arm is getting heavier. Right shoulder is getting heavier. Armpit is getting heavier. Chest is getting heavier. Waist is getting heavier. Your right hip is getting heavier. Groin is getting heavier. Your buttock is getting heavier. Your right thigh is getting heavier. Knee is getting heavier. Calf is getting heavier. Ankle is getting heavier. Heel is getting heavier. The sole of your right foot is getting heavier. Top of your foot is getting heavier. Right big toe is getting heavier. Second toe is getting heavier. Third toe is getting heavier. Your fourth right toe is getting heavier. Fifth toe is getting heavier. Your left hand thumb is getting heavier. First finger is getting heavier. Second finger is getting heavier. Your third finger is getting heavier. Fourth finger is getting heavier. The palm of your left hand is getting heavier. Back of your hand is getting heavier. Wrist is getting heavier. Forearm is getting heavier. Your left elbow is getting heavier. Upper arm is getting heavier. Left shoulder is getting heavier. Armpit is getting heavier. Chest is getting heavier. Waist is getting heavier. Hip is getting heavier. Groin is getting heavier. Buttock is getting heavier. Your left thigh is getting heavier. Knee is getting heavier. Calf is getting heavier. Ankle is getting heavier. Heel is getting heavier. The sole of your left foot is getting heavier. Top of the foot is getting heavier. The left big toe is getting heavier. Second toe is getting heavier. Third toe is getting heavier. Fourth toe is getting heavier. The fifth toe on your left foot is getting heavier. The top of your head is getting heavier. Forehead is getting heavier. Your right temple is getting heavier. Left temple is getting heavier. Right ear is getting heavier. Your left ear is getting heavier. Right cheek is getting heavier. Left cheek is getting heavier. Your right eyebrow is getting heavier. Left eyebrow is getting heavier. Your right eye is getting heavier. Your left eye is getting heavier. Right nostril is getting heavier. Left nostril is getting heavier. Your whole nose is getting heavier. Upper lip is getting heavier. Lower lip is getting heavier. Chin is getting heavier. Jaw is getting heavier. Your throat is getting heavier. Right collarbone is getting heavier. Left collarbone is getting heavier. Right chest is getting heavier. Left chest is getting heavier. Your heart center is getting heavier. Upper abdomen is getting heavier. Navel is getting heavier. Lower abdomen is getting heavier. Right groin is getting heavier. Left groin is getting heavier. The pelvic floor is getting heavier. Tailbone is getting heavier. Sacrum is getting heavier. Right buttock is getting heavier. Left buttock is getting heavier. The entire spine, from your tailbone to the base of your neck, is getting heavier. Right shoulder blade is getting heavier. Left shoulder blade is getting heavier. Back of neck is getting heavier. The back of your head is getting heavier. Crown of your head is getting heavier. The whole of your right arm is getting heavier. The whole of your left arm is getting heavier. Both arms together are getting heavier. Your whole right leg is getting heavier. Your whole left leg is getting heavier. Both of your legs together are getting heavier. The entire torso is getting heavier. The face is getting heavier. The head is getting heavier. The body is getting heavier. Your entire body is getting heavier. Your right thumb is much heavier. First finger is much heavier. Second finger is much heavier. Third finger is much heavier. Fourth finger is much heavier. The palm of your right hand is much heavier. Back of the hand is much heavier. Wrist is much heavier. Forearm is much heavier. Your right elbow is much heavier. Upper arm is much heavier. Right shoulder is much heavier. Armpit is much heavier. Chest is much heavier. Waist is much heavier. Hip is much heavier. Your right groin is much heavier. Buttock is much heavier. Thigh is much heavier. Your right knee is much heavier. Calf is much heavier. Ankle is much heavier. Heel is much heavier. The sole of your right foot is much heavier. Top of the foot is much heavier. Right big toe is much heavier. Second toe is much heavier. Third toe is much heavier. Fourth toe is much heavier. Fifth toe is much heavier. Your left thumb is much heavier. First finger is much heavier. Second finger is much heavier. Third finger is much heavier. Fourth finger is much heavier. The palm of your left hand is much heavier. Back of the hand is much heavier. Wrist is much heavier. Forearm is much heavier. Elbow is much heavier. Your left upper arm is much heavier. Left shoulder is much heavier. Armpit is much heavier. Chest is much heavier. Waist is much heavier. Hip is much heavier. Groin is much heavier. Left buttock is much heavier. Thigh is much heavier. Knee is much heavier. Calf is much heavier. Ankle is much heavier. Your left heel is much heavier. The sole of your foot is much heavier. Top of the foot is much heavier. Left big toe is much heavier. Second toe is much heavier. Third toe is much heavier. Fourth toe is much heavier. Fifth toe is much heavier. The top of your head is much heavier. Your forehead is much heavier. Right temple is much heavier. Left temple is much heavier. Right ear is much heavier. Left ear is much heavier. Your right cheek is much heavier. Left cheek is much heavier. Your right eyebrow is much heavier. Left eyebrow is much heavier. Right eye is much heavier. Left eye is much heavier. Right nostril is much heavier. Left nostril is much heavier. Your whole nose is much heavier. Upper lip is much heavier. Lower lip is much heavier. Chin is much heavier. Jaw is much heavier. Throat is much heavier. Right collarbone is much heavier. Left collarbone is much heavier. Right chest is much heavier. Left chest is much heavier. Your heart center is much heavier. Upper abdomen is much heavier. Navel is much heavier. Lower abdomen is much heavier. Your right groin is much heavier. Left groin is much heavier. The pelvic floor is much heavier. Tailbone is much heavier. Sacrum is much heavier. Right buttock is much heavier. Left buttock is much heavier. The entire spine, from the tailbone to the base of the skull, is much heavier. Right shoulder blade is much heavier. Left shoulder blade is much heavier. The back of your neck is much heavier. Back of your head is much heavier. Crown of your head is much heavier. Your whole right arm is much heavier. Your whole left arm is much heavier. Both arms together are much heavier. Your whole right leg is much heavier. Your whole left leg is much heavier. Both of your legs together are much heavier. The entire torso is much heavier. The face is much heavier. The head is much heavier. The body is much heavier. Your entire body is much heavier. Namaste, my friend.